everybody, and welcome back to the final review as a part of my B&M Exclusive action figure collector set reviews for October 2020. In today's review I'm going to be taking a look at the one new series set of the Wave, and it is of course the Friends of the 13th Doctor, or as it is also partly known, the FAM collector set, featuring Yasmin Khan, Ryan Sinclair and of course Graham O'Brien, as portrayed by Mandip Gill, Tosin Cole and Bradley Walsh. This collector set is available to be purchased now from B&M stores throughout the UK. The recommended retail price, as always, is £19.99. So taking a look at the packaging, it is exactly the same style guide to usual. Of course, we get the preview window, giving a good look at the figures on the inside of the box, as well as the Doctor Who logo and a TARDIS graphic running around the side. At the very bottom of the box, we get the inclusion of the title of the set, as well as the limited edition Capture Options sticker. As for the sides of the box, it features exactly the same details repeated, as well as the continuation of the TARDIS graphic. And then finally, at the back of the box, you do of course get images of all the action figures within this set, as well as the same details repeated. And on a little bit of a side note, has anybody else noticed how oddly elongated Yaz is compared to the other two companions of the set? It kind of seems like she's been dropped in from another dimension, where everybody seems to be an extra foot taller and ever so slightly more thin. Very unusual. So here we have the companions of the 13th Doctor out of the packaging. Now, of course, all three of these action figures have been released already. Ryan and Yaz were released as a part of the previous B&M Wave within the Friends and Foe of the 13th Doctor collector set, and of course Graham was initially released single-cardedly as a part of a 13th Doctor range earlier on this year. Now, all three of the companions use exactly the same base sculpt that was used on their original releases. However, this time round you have a number of paint applications changes, basically to make the costume look like a costume from another 13th Doctor adventure. And to be honest, much like the previous versions that have been released, I don't mind that much. I don't think that these companions are going to lose sales or anything like that, simply because they've used pre-existing sculpts from the Capture Options line, because for the most part they actually work quite well. But that said, at the same time, if you have those original releases, you kind of know what to expect. In fact, if you are a fan of the 13th Doctor, this is an absolutely perfect set for you. It's really nice to have the entirety of this TARDIS team packaged together, and then basically all you need to do is purchase a single carded version of the 13th Doctor, which you can get online fairly cheap, either in the pink outfit or the standard dark blue outfit released a number of years ago. So firstly, let's take a look at Ryan Sinclair, as portrayed by Tosin Cole. This time round we have a version of his costume, apparently from the Series 11 story, The Ghost Monument, meaning that we do have a number of colour changes, however for the most part remains considerably similar to that of the original release. So taking a closer look at the costume itself, I'm going to be 100% honest, this is quite possibly one of the most boring costumes that Capture Options have ever created, and that's not really a criticism of the costume design or anything like that, because at the end of the day, Ryan Sinclair is a generic male, and his costumes aren't really that exciting. They're just normal, they're normal everyday clothing, and I think that this figure does an alright job of representing that. In the original release, this was a rather dark colour, with a green wash applied over the top to make the jacket look worn over time. This time round it has just been sculpted in a lighter grey plastic with no wash applied over the top whatsoever, so it kind of has a rather glossy basic finish. Running down the very middle we have the inclusion of buttons. These have been given a white paint application, however aren't sculpted into the actual jacket itself, and of course on either side of the chest we also have the inclusion of pockets. Buttons this time round on these haven't been painted whatsoever. There is a number of creases here and there to give the representation that this is material as opposed to plastic, and other than that, that's basically it. Flipping around to the back, again we have very little to talk about whatsoever. We basically have the continuation of that lighter grey design and a further number of creases and a seam running down the back of the spine as well. And then we have the inclusion of what is possibly the most unconventional, annoying pockets. Why would you put pockets there? How are you even going to reach them? I've got no idea. They are of course left behind from the initial base sculpt, which was a primeval character from that other line that Capture Options did once upon a time, and yes, the sculpt works rather well, although once again, it's just a little bit boring. There's not too much going for it. In an attempt to spruce up this costume ever so slightly, we have the sculpting of the collar at the very top, and much like the initial release, this has been sculpted to be held up above the shoulders itself, which to be honest is fairly nice, but once again it's just that lighter grey. We also have a paint application in the middle of the collar, which is of course representing the exposure of a light blue shirt underneath. On the initial version of Ryan's Sinclair, the trousers were painted a lighter grey. This time round they have an ever so slightly more vibrant colour scheme as we get to see these rather unusual orange style of trouser. I do believe that they might in fact be chinos, as representing the costume from a ghost monument. This has been achieved by using an orange base paint application, but what is nice to see is we have an ever so subtle wash applied over the top. Now you can kind of see this around the creases here and generally at the bottom a little bit as well, which is nice. It adds an extra level to the costume overall and makes it look a bit more realistic as opposed to just being one block colour. But other than that, I'm not going to lie, the trousers are a little bit hideous, aren't they? I definitely won't wear them on a day-to-day basis myself. Finally, moving down to the very bottom of the costume, we have the inclusion of Ryan's shoes. On the initial release, these were painted a glossy black. This time round they are in fact white, with a wash applied over the top once again, which is a rather unusual murky yellow, again making these shoes look like that they've been worn over time. It's just a bit more interesting than having a general bland colour, so it's great to see this wash over the shoes and the trousers. It's just a shame that that wash didn't extend to the jacket as well. And now we finish off with that likeness to Tosin Cole, and much like the original release, it is absolutely incredible. It really does look like Tosin. I think that they've done a very good job, and the paint application that has been applied over the top is also very natural. In particular, I really love the eye detailing. I think that they've gone very precise with that. I love the way that we have the eye whites and then the iris in there looking very natural, and equally the paint application on the lips and eyebrows as well is also very sharp. It's keeping to the sculpt, it's very neat, it's very tidy, and overall I'm very happy with it, and it is pretty much exactly the same to the initial version that I have already reviewed. Some really lovely paint application has also taken place on the hair, and again is very similar to that of the original release. So we have a slightly darker colour here at the very top to represent the thicker volume of hair. Then as we move towards the side of the head, we have this ever so slightly lighter colour representing that fade into the different level of hair being ever so slightly shorter. It's a decent figure, it's alright, but if you have that original version, you kind of know what to expect, and to be honest, I only advise buying this collector set if you are a fan of the era or a Doctor Who action figure collector, but equally, he'll look great alongside the 13th Doctor. And next up is Yaz, as portrayed by Mandip Gill. Now, in the previous B&M collector set, the Friends and Foe of the 13th Doctor, the Yaz figure was in fact my favourite, and to be honest, this figure retains being my favourite for this collector set as well. There's simply just something about the combination of sculpt on the head and the overall base sculpt that has been used that I think works very well. Of course, on the initial release, we had the inclusion of a white shirt in the very middle. That has now been removed, and we basically have a costume that looks rather similar to the one as seen throughout the Series 12 story, Fugitive of the Jadoon, as well as a number of other paint application changes which make it look rather starkly different compared to the original release. One of the most obvious changes is of course the shirt in the very middle. This is exactly the same sculpt to the original and therefore retains exactly the same details. So you have the sculpting of the collar there at the very top, as well as the blouse being ever so slightly partially open, and the sculpt as well with a few creasing lines running around the side, representing the way the material sits on the body. The overall paint application on this has been upgraded to the original. We now have a darker cream that has been used as a base colour, and further details applied to the top using a yellow and black paint application to kind of represent a leopard print design. And to be honest, for the 5.5 scale, it is in fact rather effective. It is simplistic, but you definitely get what it is trying to achieve, and it is again rather interesting. It makes this figure stand out on the shelf a little bit more so than the original. So now flipping around to the side of the costume, we have the inclusion of the jacket. Now this looks very similar to the original, as once again it has been coloured brown. Overall finish does appear to be ever so slightly different. Again, I'm currently at university, so I can't in fact compare between the two figures directly, but from what I can tell, this does appear to be ever so slightly darker in brown shade, but also at the same time appears to be ever so slightly glossier. A number of stitching lines running down the middle, as well as a lot of creases, and this does of course continue onto the back of the jacket as well. Even though this is plastic, a lot of attention to detail. We'll have these numerous little lines down here, as well as a number of stitching lines, and even the suggestion of the collar there at the very top, and even buttons on the cuffs of the jacket as well. This is the type of detail that I expect from an item of clothing within a Culture Options action figure, and this is the most detail that it kind of gets. And then when comparing that to the Ryan figure, it makes that one look even more dull. As we move further down the figure, we have the inclusion of a belt which has been painted light brown, and even a silver highlight over the buckle in the very middle, again standing out and a really nice detail. On the initial version of Yaz, the trousers were painted multiple different shades of blue in order to give the representation of a denim jean. It has been replaced by a black paint application, but an ever so slight dark blue wash has been added over the top to perhaps give the suggestion of this being a form of legging or something like that. A little bit of attention to detail and makes it look more exciting than just a generic block colour. Then finally, as we conclude the costume, of course the initial version of Yaz had a light brown shoe, something a bit more interesting going on as the top half is now a light red, and at the very bottom we have the inclusion of a black paint application representing the sole. However, as we move further back to the end of the shoe, we also have the detailing of a heel in there as well. Very much like how I said within the previous review of the Friends and Foe of the 13th Doctor collector set, the sculpting detail for Yaz's head sculpt is absolutely flawless. I would dare say once again that this is perhaps one of the best sculpt and paint application combinations that have featured on a Doctor Who Catch Options action figure for many years. It has loads of lovely details, and I think that overall it most definitely looks like Mandip Gill. Some very sharp paint application on the eyes, lips and eyebrows, as well as the sculpting detail on the hair. It's absolutely incredible. I love the way that we have these different strands. It is a very difficult hairstyle to replicate within the 5.5 action figure format, but as we tilt around to the sides here, they've definitely gave it a good shot. We have the inclusion of the space buns at the very top, lots of different details within that, as well as further banded strands coming around the side, and of course draping down the side of the back as well, featuring a piece going over the spine and then the other two going over the shoulders, looking very natural. So yes, basically if you want to see more of me complimenting this sculpt, check out the initial review, because basically all of my compliments stand once more for this figure because it is basically identical. The third and final figure of this collector's set is of course Grime O'Brien, as portrayed by Bradley Walsh. Now, I haven't in fact reviewed the Grime figure as of yet. It was released in early 2020 and I do in fact have it. I purchased it very recently, basically alongside the Jungles of Mechanus collector set. I bought it solely to bulk out the order, make it ever so slightly more expensive, and as a result get free packaging and posting. So yes, I do have that figure, however it is back at home, which is a little bit of a shame because considering I've not reviewed that one, I would have probably thrown that figure into this review so that I could cover both of them at the same time, because it is exactly the same base sculpt, but once again we have a number of paint application changes to make it look like a costume from a different story, and it works fairly well. I feel like all the budget has been spent on Yaz because once again we have a very similar situation to that of Ryan, where the jacket is basically one block colour and nothing more than that. Admittedly, there are a few details on this which have of course been left behind from the initial character from the Primeval range, which does of course include a zipper running down the very middle, as well as a number of pockets running around the chest, but creases and wrinkles, and of course this elastic kind of design running around the waist. Again, it would have been nice just to have maybe a wash over the top of this to make the jacket look worn, or maybe even an ever so slight paint application on the zipper to kind of show that that exists. Back to the same detailing does also apply to the back as well, but we just have further creases and wrinkles, and basically it's a pretty boring jacket to say the least. I have the suggestion of a white shirt underneath with a checkered design, which has been represented by a blue and red lined paint application, which again is considerably sharp and a bit more interesting. For the arms, these have once again been sculpted in that light brown plastic and feature the standard detailing once again, and of course the hands have been sculpted in an open palm position to hold the accessories that he doesn't come with. Of course, the initial version of Graham did feature a light brown jacket, and from what I can recall that may have had a wash applied over the top of it, but that said, even though I've just criticised this jacket for being pretty boring, I still kind of like this figure more than the original version. Light brown works just a little bit better than the grey. It looks a bit more exciting. As per the original version of Graham, we have the inclusion of the rather baggy variation of trouser, of smaller details that you come to expect on trousers, including the suggestion of pockets at the side of the waist, as well as around the back as well. Of course, on the initial version, again, this had a paint application that kind of looked very familiar to that of a denim jean. It was a darker wash with a lighter wash applied over the top. It was a bit more interesting, but I think that this darker version does definitely work a lot better with the lighter brown jacket above. And for what is actually the first ever time on the Host Productions, let's take a look at the likeness to that of Bradley Walsh, and it's a little bit creepy, I'm not gonna lie. It's very, very unusual having a small plastic Bradley Walsh. Much like Yaz and Ryan, the likeness to Bradley Walsh is pretty decent. A similar thing to that of the 12th Doctor kind of applies, where they've been ever so slightly generous to the ageing on the face. I think that some of those details have been lost, especially some of the wrinkles around the eyes and the forehead, due to the paint application that has been used. I think that all the other details, including the lips, eyes and eyebrows, are all considerably natural, and of course his skin tone is also fairly pale as well. Again, a very intricate application on the iris being of course a lighter blue. As we move around to the side, of course, hair has been painted ever so slightly differently to the original, which admittedly, again, I didn't in fact realise up until filming this review, and I'm relying entirely on photos that I'm currently looking at on my phone behind the camera. But basically, from what I can tell, on the initial version, this was a very, very light grey. Now we have a lighter brown base colour with a grey wash applied over the top, and I think that definitely this looks a bit better. I think it looks a bit more natural, as opposed to making Bradley Walsh look like he's got entirely silver hair. I am very, very happy with it, and I think that it concludes this set and has 3 figures with 3 excellent likenesses. But admittedly, he does seem to be smiling a little bit creepily. Briefly mentioning articulation, of course all 3 of these action figures use exactly the same sculpt to pre-existing Character Options action figures as a part of the Primeval series, so as a result the articulation is considerably basic compared to some of the later releases as a part of the Doctor Who series. So there we have it. That concludes not only my review of the Friends of the 13th Doctor B&M Exclusive action figure collector set, but also the entirety of my B&M Exclusive reviews for October 2020. It's been a fairly nice collection of action figures. I think that in particular, if you missed out on the original Forbidden Planet exclusive series, the release of further classic series TARDISes, and of course multiple different versions of Dalek, are really great to add to the shelf in order to boost your Dalek armies. And of course for fans of the 13th Doctor era, it is lovely to also have the release of an action figure collector set from new series Doctor Who as well. If you are somebody who's currently running a little bit short of cash and want to prioritise certain sets over others, I think that this one should probably be ever so slightly lower down on the list. I absolutely love the Yaz release. I think it is perfect. I think the paint application is very crisp and detailed, and overall is a very decent variation of the companion. However, at the same time, all 3 of the figures within this collector set have essentially been released already, and if you have those initial versions, then there isn't really too much difference. Yes, there is a few colour changes here and there. Yes, Grime's jacket is now brown as opposed to light grey, and likewise Ryan's trousers are now orange as opposed to whatever colour they were, light grey, on the original release, but that still isn't that interesting. So I do recommend this set if you are an action figure collector and generally like to buy figures anyway, or if you're a fan of the 13th Doctor era and perhaps have missed out on the initial releases. But had we been living in normal circumstances at the minute, I will be 100% honest, I think I would have waited off purchasing this set and actually waited for it to get reduced, because I'm going to place a bet that this collector set is going to be on the shelves of B&M for quite a while, and simply because of the current circumstances of the pandemic, when I went out to get these collector sets, my one aim was to get as many of them as possible to kind of reduce the amount of travelling that I would need to do. Since this one was on the shelf, I just decided to pick it up along with all of the others. So yes, a decent set if you like the era, however not necessarily the most exciting. So thank you very much for watching this review. I really hope you have enjoyed it. If you haven't already, please do check out my other Doctor Who B&M exclusive collector set reviews, as this is of course now the final review as a part of this series. And do of course also stay tuned on the Ghost Productions for brand new Doctor Who content each and every week, from product reviews, big finish reviews, and much, much more. So thanks for watching, have a nice day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye for now.